For centuries, the Church told us that Jesus stood alone, divine, distant, untouchable. But the Gospels say otherwise. They speak of brothers, of sisters, of a real family that shared his blood. So why did history fall silent? Why did their names, Joseph, Simon, Judas, and even the sisters the Bible mentions, simply disappear? What if their silence wasn't an accident, but a choice, a deliberate rewriting of the past that reshaped how we see Jesus, Mary, and the very meaning of holiness itself? Hello everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for joining us again on this journey to uncover what history tried to hide. In our previous episode, we explored the life of a man the Church could never erase, James, the Lord's brother. His transformation from skeptic to the leader of the Jerusalem Church stood as living proof that Jesus came from a real, human family, a truth that the doctrine of perpetual virginity could not easily explain. If you missed that episode, you can watch part 3, James the brother they couldn't erase, by clicking the card on the top right corner of your screen. But the story doesn't end there, because when the Church redefined one brother, the ripple didn't stop. It spread outward, silencing the rest of Jesus' family, one name at a time. This is the story of the brothers and sisters who vanished from Scripture, from sermons, and from history itself. Welcome to part 4, the ripple effect, silencing the family. James, the Lord's brother, was too prominent, too central to the Jerusalem Church to be completely erased. His existence remained a stubborn fact, forcing later theologians into complex reinterpretations. But what about Jesus' other siblings? The Gospels explicitly name Joses, or Joseph, Simon, and Judas. Image showing Matthew 13-55, 5-6 scripture verse, and they mention multiple sisters, though unnamed. Where did they go in the historical record? Why is their story almost entirely silent? Unlike James, these other brothers don't emerge as major leaders in the book of Acts or Paul's letters. Judas, or Jude, is traditionally credited with writing the short epistle of Jude in the New Testament. In it, he identifies himself simply as a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James, Jude 1-1. Notice, he defines himself in relation to James, the prominent leader, not directly as a brother of Jesus, perhaps out of humility or because James's position was so well established. Beyond this letter, information about Joseph, Simon, and the sisters is virtually non-existent in the canonical texts. Why the silence? Several possibilities exist. Perhaps, like James initially, they remained less central to the burgeoning Christian movement after their conversion. Maybe they lived quieter lives as believers within the Judean or Galilean communities, respected but not taking on major leadership roles that would be recorded by historians like Luke or noted by Paul. However, another possibility exists, intertwined with the very reasons James became an inconvenient truth. As the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity gained strength, and as the focus of the Church shifted decisively away from its Jewish roots in Jerusalem towards the Gentile world and the authority of Rome, represented by Peter and Paul, Jesus' entire biological family may have become theologically awkward. Highlighting their existence, even as ordinary believers, constantly brought up the uncomfortable question of Mary's other children. It might have been institutionally convenient to simply downplay their presence. Early traditions about them, perhaps preserved orally, may have been allowed to fade, not copied by scribes focused on the more important narratives, solidifying the emerging orthodoxy. There's a fascinating historical fragment that hints at this. The early church historian Julius Africanus, writing around 220 AD, mentions a group known as the Desposyni. This term literally means belonging to the master, or the Lord's people in Greek. Africanus explains these were the blood relatives of Jesus who were known and respected in the Judean churches of the 1st and 2nd centuries. He notes they even took pride in their lineage, tracing back to David through Jesus' family. However, Africanus also hints that these relatives were viewed with some suspicion by Roman authorities and perhaps even by later Gentile church leaders, precisely because of their blood connection, which represented a potential alternative, hereditary claim to authority. Could the deliberate silencing of Jesus' brothers and sisters have been part of a larger effort to sideline this entire family line, clearing the way for a purely institutional, non-hereditary leadership structure based in Rome. The theological impact of erasing the siblings was profound. It contributed significantly to creating an image of Jesus as detached from typical human family bonds. His primary relationships in the official narrative become his disciples, representing the new family of the Church. This reinforces his perceived otherworldly nature, making him seem less grounded in the messy realities of ordinary human life. It also subtly elevates the Church institution itself, positioning it as Jesus' true family and legacy on earth, rather than any biological kin. Silencing the family served to enhance both Jesus' unique divinity and the Church's unique authority. The ripple effect of the Perpetual Virginity doctrine wasn't just about Mary. It cast a long shadow, obscuring the faces and stories of Jesus' own brothers and sisters, reducing his earthly family to a historical footnote in service of a theological agenda. We've examined the scriptural evidence. We've traced the historical development of a counter-doctrine. We've seen how Jesus' own brother, James, became an inconvenient truth. But you might still be asking, why does any of this matter today? Why revisit these ancient debates? Why challenge a tradition held sacred by millions for centuries? It matters because the truth about Jesus' family isn't just a historical footnote. It directly impacts how we understand Jesus himself, the early Church, and even our own faith. Acknowledging his siblings helps us reclaim a more historically accurate and profoundly relatable picture of Jesus. For centuries, theology often presented Jesus as almost detached from his earthly origins. His divinity was emphasized, sometimes at the expense of his full humanity. But the Gospels show us a man deeply embedded in a real family. He had a mother who worried about him. He had brothers who initially doubted him, then came to lead his movement. He had sisters who were part of the local community. This wasn't an isolated, otherworldly figure floating above human concerns. He grew up in a bustling household, likely noisy, complex, full of the everyday dynamics we all experience. Recognizing his siblings grounds him, makes his incarnation more tangible, more real. He wasn't just God pretending to be human. He was God living a full human life, including family relationships. Acknowledging his siblings also forces us to challenge dogmas based primarily on later tradition rather than clear scripture. The doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity became deeply cherished, but as we've seen, it required strained interpretations of the biblical text. Honest faith isn't afraid to ask, does this doctrine align with the earliest evidence, or was it developed later for specific theological and institutional reasons? Questioning tradition isn't a sign of weak faith. It can be an act of seeking a faith grounded more firmly in the original sources. Furthermore, recognizing Jesus' family, especially James, highlights the importance of the Jerusalem Church. Western Christianity often focuses almost exclusively on the narrative arc from Jesus to Peter and Paul, leading to Rome. But the earliest center of the faith was Jerusalem, led by Jesus' own brother. This was a church deeply rooted in its Jewish context, grappling with the relationship between faith in Jesus and the law of Moses. Recovering James's story gives us a more balanced picture of early Christianity, reminding us of its diverse origins and the crucial role of Jewish believers in the very beginning. It challenges a purely Gentile-centric, Rome-focused view of church history. This investigation also opens up vital discussions about how doctrine develops. Faith isn't static. The Church's understanding of key beliefs evolved over centuries, influenced not just by scripture and divine revelation, but also by cultural assumptions, philosophical trends like Hellenistic asceticism, political pressures like the alliance with the Roman Empire, and institutional needs like consolidating authority and wealth. Seeing how the narrative about Jesus' family was shaped by these factors encourages a more critical and discerning approach to all doctrines. It invites us to ask why we believe what we believe, and whether those beliefs are truly rooted in the original message or in later additions. Finally, reclaiming Jesus' family encourages us to reevaluate the role of family in spiritual life. The emphasis on celibacy sometimes created a tension, suggesting family was secondary or even an obstacle to holiness. But if Jesus himself lived within a family, navigated sibling relationships, and saw his own brother become the leader of his church, it affirms the sacredness of family bonds. It suggests that faith is lived out not in escaping human relationships, but within them. This recovered picture of a more human Jesus, grounded in a real family, isn't less divine. It is, perhaps, more powerfully incarnate. It offers a model of faith that embraces the complexities of human life, challenges us to seek truth beyond comfortable traditions, and connects us more deeply to the historical roots of the movement he began. So, we stand at the end of this investigation. We've sifted through the clear evidence in Scripture, passages explicitly naming James, Joses, Simon, and Judas as adelphoi, brothers, mentioning unnamed adelphi, sisters. We've examined the linguistic arguments, how adelphos overwhelmingly meant biological brother, how the Greek language had specific words for cousin, anepsios, that the writers chose not to use. We've traced the historical development of the counter-doctrine, Mary's perpetual virginity. Driven by ascetic ideals, the popularity of texts like the Proto-Evangelium and the decisive arguments of figures like Jerome. Motivated by the theological and institutional need to elevate Mary, reinforce celibacy, and subtly distance Jesus from ordinary human family life. We focused on the undeniable figure of James, the Lord's brother, his transformation from skeptic to the revered leader of the Jerusalem church, his prominence posing a direct, irrefutable challenge to the perpetual virginity narrative. We've considered the silence surrounding the other siblings, likely a ripple effect of the same doctrinal pressures that forced the reinterpretation of James's relationship, and we've reflected on why acknowledging this seemingly simple historical fact matters today. It gives us a more human, relatable Jesus. It challenges us to examine tradition critically against Scripture. It highlights the crucial, often overlooked, role of James and the Jewish roots of the faith. It invites us to understand how doctrine evolves, influenced by culture and power, and it affirms the sacredness of family. The conclusion is uncomfortable, yet unavoidable for those who prioritize the earliest textual evidence. The narrative that Jesus was an only child, and his brothers were merely cousins or step-siblings, appears to be a later construct, a doctrine developed centuries after the fact, driven by specific theological and institutional needs, which then required the plain meaning of Scripture to be reinterpreted. The power of tradition, especially when wielded by a dominant institution, effectively overruled the most natural reading of the Bible's own words for over 1,500 years. This realization doesn't have to destroy faith, but it does invite discernment. It calls us to read Scripture with fresh eyes, to ask honest questions about the origins of our beliefs, to distinguish between the foundational message of Jesus and the layers of interpretation added later, to seek a faith grounded in truth, even when that truth challenges long-held traditions. This journey of discovery does not end here. This is just the beginning. If this investigation into Jesus' family has touched you, if it has awakened something in your spirit, we want to hear from you. Leave your prayer request in the comments. This is a community of seekers, and we are here to support one another. If you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, your engagement is crucial. Like this video to show that this truth matters. Share it with someone who is also asking questions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the secrets we plan to unveil next go even deeper into suppressed biblical truths. Did the Bible mention Jesus' brothers? The text says, yes. Should we value truth over tradition? Comment below, truth over tradition, if you agree. The story of Jesus' family reminds us that history is complex, faith is a journey, and the search for truth is a sacred calling. The truth was not lost, it was simply hidden, and now it is being brought back into the light.